Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, July 17th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about the race for vice president. As the Trump campaign announces today, they cannot commit to a vice presidential debate and will not commit, citing uncertainty over the Democratic ticket, the Biden-Harris ticket. Now, this comes at a time that the Donald Trump campaign has now announced that Senator J.D. Vance from the state of Ohio will be his vice presidential pick in the 2024 presidential election. J.D. Vance, who is a junior senator from the state of Ohio, recently elected back in 2022, and longtime critic of the former president, is now going to be running second in command to the Trump ticket this time around. But just yesterday, Senator J.D. Vance says that he wanted to debate Vice President Harris. Obviously, we being the campaign, want to debate Vice President Harris. That has been very clear from the Trump side that they don't perceive her as a threat until they show their hand. This decision here to not committing to a vice presidential debate, I think, stems from exactly what happened back in 2020 when the Democrats won the presidential election. That came at a time where Mike Pence lost the first presidential debate against Vice President Harris, who was then Senator Kamala Harris. Now, it was a bit different than 2016, where Mike Pence actually won the first debate, according to the CNN poll. This goes to show that Mike Pence really was stronger as a candidate back in 2016, and Tim Kaine, senator from Virginia, was arguably a worse vice presidential choice than Vice President Kamala Harris. Mike Pence ended up beating Tim Kaine by a narrow margin, but still, in a huge display and a huge contrast to Donald Trump, Mike Pence was able to put on this face of presidentialism, this face of strength and security for the American people, and that's what won him that first vice presidential debate, the only vice presidential debate. In 2020, Kamala Harris won. And so then came into questioning, okay, what was the impact of the vice presidential debate? And to be quite honest with you, there wasn't much in terms of overall what people were willing to vote for or not, and how likely people thought others were going to win. On one end, people believed that President Biden, or at the time Vice President Biden, had a higher chance of victory after this debate, and that Donald Trump's roughly declined but was largely the same. But in terms of how likely people were to vote for on both sides, it was almost the same. You roughly saw that there was very minimal movement. Kamala Harris and Mike Pence really saw no change in overall support for Biden or Trump, depending on this VP debate. But here's where it really mattered. When it came down to a question of how these individual candidates for vice president were able to handle themselves, 69.3% gave Kamala Harris a good rating on performance, and on policy, it was 62%. Mike Pence, on the other hand, 59% say it was a good performance, just 44% say they were good policies. The majority of watchers said that Mike Pence had poor policies. Roughly a third said the same about Vice President Harris, and less than a third said that she had poor performance, and nearly 40% said Mike Pence had poor performance. And then when it came down to a line of questioning around favorability rating, this is where you actually start to see why this debate mattered. While Mike Pence's favorability rating went up by 2 points, his unfavorables went up by 1 point. Same thing for Harris, but she gained significantly. Went from the plurality of voters viewing her favorably at 45% to the majority of voters at 51%. That is a non-insignificant increase. 6% increase, Pence saw a 2% increase, and Harris ended up with the majority of viewers walking in her favor. And the reason I think that the Trump team is putting pause on this VP debate is because of exactly what they saw in 2020, where VP Harris's numbers improved. Why would that matter? The set number of times for the debate. The Trump team agreed that they would potentially go for a debate, the Biden campaign rather, agreed for a debate in July or in days leading into the Democratic convention. After this first presidential debate and after the RNC, both Democrats and Republicans threw out that July date. So it looked like it was going to take place August 12th, August 13th, just days before the Democratic National Convention, set to take place on August 19th. But now they throw it out. And I genuinely believe this is because J.D. Vance, who did not have a stellar performance against Tim Ryan back in the Ohio Senate race in that debate, I implore you to watch it to see how J.D. Vance articulates himself. He's a strong commanded speaker in some aspects, but on a debate stage, he really cannot rebut personal or character attacks that in some cases are relevant to a campaign, and in this case would be relevant given J.D. Vance's comments. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But essentially here, I think what the Republicans are worried about is that Kamala Harris would beat J.D. Vance in a debate the same way she beat Vice President Mike Pence. and she would be able to turn that into momentum for the Democratic Party. And with all this conversation, arguably, around Vice President Harris potentially replacing President Biden at the convention, it will also ring out as a potential pushback on VP Harris gaining any type of momentum in the event that she does, in fact, take over for President Biden, because it could allow her to debate against J.D. Vance, take the nomination, debate against Donald Trump, and maintain that level of momentum, the energy and enthusiasm for a revitalized base around a new nominee. And I'm not saying this is happening. I'm saying this is probably what's going to be the thought process for the Republicans, and I don't even know if this would happen. That's an entirely separate video topic. But point being here, the Republican Party is not making this decision lightly. They don't genuinely have uncertainty. They do not genuinely believe in the uncertainty around the Democratic ticket. I think what the Trump team knows is that Joe Biden is going to be the nominee, or at least they're using this as cover. Because why not try to go after a fractured campaign if that's genuinely what they believe? I mean, you don't overplay your hand and say, there's uncertainty in the ticket, so we're going to allow gracefully the Democratic Party to reconcile and put forth a new nominee and put forth a new vice presidential. I mean, that is not where we're at here. The Trump team has played dirty since the 2016 election, and this is another one of their tactics, because I genuinely think the Republican Party is worried about the choice they made for vice president, because J.D. Vance has a lot more to answer to than just the American people. 8 years ago, J.D. Vance was into the media saying he was a never Trump Republican. 8 years ago, J.D. Vance compared Donald Trump to Hitler. 8 years ago, J.D. Vance said he could not vote for Donald Trump and that he could potentially be voting for Hillary Clinton if Donald Trump's chances at victory were that high. 8 years ago, J.D. Vance was anti-Trump beyond belief, made articles, wrote articles bashing Trump, wrote out tweets endorsing Evan McMullin. He was probably one of the more anti-Trump Republicans that honestly faded off into irrelevancy after the 2016 election. So what did he do? He cozied up to the former president, and now he's his running mate. But when you make comments like those, the American public is very big and very forgiving in many cases. You've seen it happen on Democratic politics. President Obama, Vice President Biden, 20 years ago, were not pro-gay marriage. Hillary Clinton, 20 years ago, not pro-gay marriage. You've seen it on a number of issues, too. It isn't just LGBT rights. You talk about Medicare for all. You talk about border policy. You talk about immigration. You talk about so many different things that we've seen the American public reward politicians who have eventually moved over to a position that they now see palatable for their voting bloc, for who they are as a person. In this case, I'm sure 99% of Republicans that were voting for Trump before will be voting for him again if J.D. Vance, and since J.D. Vance is going to be this vice presidential nominee. At the same time, Republicans are not who we're worried about here. J.D. Vance was a play for the base, and in a way, that makes sense. But independent voters, I genuinely believe, are going to have trouble backing a vice presidential nominee who comes into this after 8 years ago comparing Donald Trump to Hitler. I mean, this is not some type of weird reality TV show, as much as American politics has started to feel like it over the past 2 weeks. This has become our very real reality, that voters now have to make a decision about somebody who's being thrown into this. J.D. Vance, who wasn't even on the radar when Donald Trump lost the first election and is now the candidate for vice president here. We are now seeing him thrown back into the fray, or thrown into the fray for the first time, and he has a lot more to answer for that I think they aren't ready to see being displayed on the national stage. Because the question and the line of questioning that will come from CBS News moderators will not be easy. You referred to Donald Trump as this. How do you reconcile? Senator, you didn't answer my question. How do you reconcile? Kamala Harris fights back and says, look, he can't even answer. I mean, you can see this playing out so easily. We know J.D. Vance, more than likely, would not have a succinct answer, or one that is even approachable to this. Yes, people can change their minds, but the way that J.D. Vance approached Donald Trump in the first place is the exact reason why I thought he was the worst pick out of Doug Burgum, Marco Rubio, Tim Scott, J.D. Vance, Elise Stefanik. He was easily the worst possible pick for Donald Trump, and he chose him. And that will be potentially his own downfall. And so now, too, we have to question, what is the Trump team, what are they really worried about as well? I mean, I think Kamala Harris, coming into this, the Trump team has written her off. You've seen the Republican Party refer to her as the DEI vice president. I mean, in theory, there should be nothing you're afraid about, right? But in reality, there's a lot more that I think people really don't give her credit for, and I think that's exactly what we're seeing here. I'm not saying anything, trying to say anything from a partisan standpoint. I genuinely think that this shows them backing out on a vice presidential debate, and there has to be a reason for it well beyond citing uncertainty over the Democratic ticket. That is not a valid reason as to why you back out. And so we really have to understand more about the dynamics that a Harris-Vance matchup would do and position this election. Because there is one factor in this entire election that is brand new to the American people, and that is Senator J.D. Vance. And they have been running from the media since this decision because they don't have answers to a lot of what J.D. Vance has said in the past or arguably done in the past. All of those scandals that were statewide and kept at home in Ohio that resulted in one of the worst performances we saw for a statewide Republican in Ohio in this election. Every single county, with the exception of 2 or 3, shifting over to the left relative to 2020 in a national environment that is 7 points to the right of 2020. All of those scandals mattered. When Tim Ryan brought up a fake charity case for the opioid crisis, that mattered in a state like Ohio. And you know where it will matter too? In the Rust Belt, where Democrats are looking to win. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Ohio is just one of those states. You have to look at it further too. J.D. Vance comes into this with baggage because he's new. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, all names that the American public knows well. Just 67% of the nation knows who J.D. Vance is today upon nomination. By November, that'll be around 90 to 95%. And that gives Democrats so many opportunities to paint the narrative around him, paint out who he is. And he is the only new, real new figure in this election. Because everybody else has been vetted out the wazoo. Everybody else. Vice President Harris, President Joe Biden, President Donald Trump, all the baggage that we knew about them will be brought back up, but it's baggage that has been tried and tested back in 2020. Arguably, since 2020, both of them, Trump, Biden, Harris, all of them, have new things to add into their plate, but that has also been under scrutiny and under public light. J.D. Vance was not a mainstream name, not even a known name prior to the 2022 midterms. If you had told Donald Trump J.D. Vance will be your vice presidential running mate after he lost the 2020 election, he would laugh and say, who even is that? Because it wasn't on the radar, it wasn't in consideration, and it feels like a very rushed pick. Again, also, a play to the base. It feels like a pick that was reminiscent of John McCain choosing Sarah Palin, somebody who cannot and has not been vetted to an extreme. Someone who has contrary opinions with the position of the president, and also J.D. Vance, who is associated with the super scary, to the American public, super scary Project 2025. I mean, that is the way that this is being viewed now, as a very, very negative vision for America. J.D. Vance is on tape, saying, I like some of the ideas behind Project 2025, has very close ties to the Heritage Foundation, which has launched Project 2025. Those things are going to be used to tie Trump and Vance to Project 2025, which shows now in recent polls to be a more important issue to voters than Biden's age. You can see that in recent polling. Marist College, perfect example. 65% of the nation says that Biden does not have the mental fortitude to serve out another 4-year term. He wins the poll by 2. Why? They asked the same question around Project 2025, the plurality of Americans, because not everybody knows about it, but roughly a 2-to-1 ratio of people believe that Project 2025 is bad to good, which means if that is extended, 42% of the nation believes it's bad. That's already high enough that even that amount of people know what Project 2025 is. You know, you've seen Heritage Foundation really try to keep this insular. They have not tried to do a whole marketing campaign around it because they know that the political calculus on it is bad. Point being, though, it gives the Democratic Party so much more ammunition. And so I think that's really what the team here on the Trump side is worried about. I think that's what they're afraid of. That, you know, J.D. Vance is saying, I want to debate Kamala Harris, but the team is saying you're going to lose that vice presidential debate. Because J.D. Vance, for lack of a better word, is inexperienced and also uniquely unvetted. He has had very little time to undergo a substantive vet for vice president. Equally, what they knew in that vet and decided to look past, I think, is political malpractice. The fact that J.D. Vance was even in consideration to be Trump's VP after the comments he made about him, especially as Trump now brings in this whole idea of real loyalty, not fake loyalty. No one who has ever spoken out against him should have a position in his administration except for his vice president who compared him to Hitler. Think about how that will play in suburban America. Think about how that will play in rural America. Think about how that will play in urban America. Democrats are going to use this. They're going to use the words of J.D. Vance against him. and so would Vice President Harris. And so despite all of this quote-unquote uncertainty around the Democratic ticket, there is something far more ingrained in the Trump campaign that they don't want to admit, that they're afraid of debating against Vice President Harris, that they're afraid that J.D. Vance will lose the debate in the same way Mike Pence did, and that Kamala Harris will come out on top and boost Biden and her own numbers into the convention, into after the convention, and allow the Democratic ticket to have a far better performance than what otherwise might be there in the first place. So, all eyes on the vice presidential debate, all eyes on the Trump team, the Biden team to figure out what they do. Because as it looks right now, this vice presidential debate is off indefinitely. After the convention, maybe it's up in the air, but right now, no new dates have been put forth, and it looks like the Trump team is covering for something far more ingrained in their campaign that they really don't want to see get to the surface or get to the media. And it'll be interesting to see over the next couple of weeks what that actually is. Maybe they're afraid J.D. Vance is going to lose. Maybe they think Kamala Harris will be the presidential nominee. I don't know what it is, but we will see, because all around, not a good look to back out of a vice presidential debate after you make such a big deal about the first one being the end-all be-all for the presidential election. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist of my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today. Sorry, tomorrow.